Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Dine Sports YouTube page and podcast network. Today we are going to be sitting down with Michelle Huard of the Ottawa Swans Aussie Rules Football Club. And Michelle is not only a player but also a coach, and also sits on the AFL Ontario Board of Directors as well too. So she can speak from quite a few different lenses there, not only sort of on the field playing, but also sort of with the policymakers shaping the future of the sport as well too. So very cool, and just in general, very interesting to learn about a sport that really doesn't get a lot of media coverage outside of maybe owning a special sports package or waking up super early on a weekend there to sort of catch the Sportsnet 1 or one of the sort of back channels there to see some actual Aussie rules football in action. But very cool sport, and always interesting to learn more about it there. So we sit down with her and pick apart sort of what goes into running an Aussie rules football club and association and high performance team during a pandemic as well too. So hope you guys enjoy. Hey everyone, we're joined today by Michelle Huard of the Ottawa Swans Aussie Rules Football Club today. Michelle, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks so much for joining us. How's things in your neck of the woods? Everyone staying safe and healthy?
Not bad, yeah. I mean, I'm still working at home, so I'm pretty safe here. So things are
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. So, I mean, why don't we start right off the top with a very easy one here. If there's someone who's listening right now who has never heard of Australian rules football or AFL or any of that, in a nutshell, what's the Coles Notes version of what Aussie rules football is?
Yeah, so it's it's kind of a mix of a lot of sports, to be honest. We play on an oval. Typically, it would be 18 aside. You kick for goals. There's a ball up to start the game at the beginning. It is full contact, but I think a lot of people assume it's going to be a lot like rugby. It's not really like rugby. It's a little bit more, I would say, like soccer, where it's very 360. So you have sort of your back line, your midfielders, and your forwards, but you can always come back. There's sort of no offside. So it feels like chaos. It looks like chaos. It's kicking and hand passing to move the ball sort of up the ground. And again, with full contact. So you get to tackle people or bump people out of the way. So when you start playing, it feels like it's complete chaos, and it's a pretty high-scoring game, so it just never stops moving. For the men's side, particularly in Canada, they do 20-minute quarters, and then for women, we do 15-minute quarters. So typically, it would be either a 90-minute game or hour-long games.
Okay. All right. And for those who have seen it on TV there, you guys have some of the most enthusiastic sort of goal judges in the world there with the fingers and the
Yes.
points when they go through.
We take it really seriously when we have to judge goals like that. It is very enthusiastic. You're right. I've never really thought about that, but you're right.
So, I mean, how did you get involved in the sport?
Yeah. So a friend of mine actually that I've known since high school, she started playing it, I think back in 2012. So she actually was a part of the original Swans women's team. I was not living here in Ottawa at the time, but she had been harassing me to play for years. Because she thought, I think when you start playing, you're like, this is the best thing I've ever been a part of. The community is awesome. The sport is super fun. It's really intense. And so she kind of was on me to join it. And I kind of looked at it and was like, you're nuts. That looks insane. I could never keep up with that. So before I joined, actually, she was able to get my brother and my cousin on board here in Ottawa. So they started playing. So I started kind of watching more games and I was like, okay, this looks pretty cool. Like, this looks like a lot of fun. So I actually joined a team out in Toronto back in, I think it was 2015. So I played out there for about 3 years, and then I came here at the end of 2017, and I've been with the Swans for 2 seasons. This would have been the third, but no season for us this year, I guess. So
Yeah, good old COVID, eh?
yeah.
So, like, what was it when you stepped onto the field for the first time that really hooked you and sort of got you coming back for more and more games there?
Um, it was actually the training sessions that hooked me, because we started like winter training, and that happens months before you sort of get on the field, because there's so many weird skills to learn before you step on the field. Stepping on the field just looks terrifying, because you're like, I don't know how to kick the ball. I don't know how to do this stupid hand pass thing that I've never seen before. And so I was hooked based on the skills, because the skills are very technical and it's something different than you've ever sort of done before. So like that kind of hooked me right away. And I don't think I've missed very many training sessions since 2015, to be honest. the game itself, I kind of froze and was like, I have no idea what's happening here. It's not that the contact was scary, because the first time you get hit, you're like, you know what, that wasn't that bad. It's fine. I'll take it again. But you just don't know what's happening out there. So it's just, there's so much going on around you. But honestly, I think what kept me, it wasn't particularly that first game. It was how amazing the footy community is. So everyone kind of gets around you in this really amazing way. And it was like, I was going through a lot at that point in my life. And so it was this community I had no idea that I needed. So you kind of like, after you're done games, you kind of go out for a couple beers and just enjoy time with your buddies. And I think that was sort of that's why I stuck it out, because I was like, man, these people are amazing. So I fell in love with the game itself, but it took me a few games to understand what was even happening, to not feel like I just would freeze. I was like, I don't know what's going on around me. So it took me a while to really learn like the game stuff. But for sure, I would say it's community that kept me around, which is pretty unique. So
yeah. So did you feel sort of like Timbits ice hockey there where, for your first time, where it's, okay, well, I'm just going to go wherever the most amount of people are going and sort of trying to look busy?
Kind of. And every time I had my hands on the ball, I just got hit. And I was like, all right, like I can't even go from A to B. I can't even take like 3 steps. So you get better at it and you start learning like what's kind of around you. And I played kind of house league soccer when I was younger, but I came from a volleyball background, so that's not super conducive to field sports. So I feel like girls that have played sort of soccer and rugby, they kind of come into it and they're much more aware of their surroundings. And I find like, I watched some of our rookies go out and I'm like, oh my God, it took me like 3 years to be that good. So if you've played that field sport before, your awareness is a lot better than mine was. Whereas for me, I was like standing in one spot with volleyball. I know I'm not going to get hit. It was such a different game for me. So yeah.
yeah. And then as you mentioned, the post-game beers doesn't hurt, sort of keeping you coming back for the next
it's helpful. Yeah. That's just it. And I think too, like, I don't know, anyone that's played sort of a contact sport too, you feel like you go to battle with these people. Yeah. And so it's kind of a funny bond that is actually really hard to find in other areas, particularly as an adult. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah. So you already mentioned, your first game was with a club was only back in 2015, and you fast forward to today, and you're now actually sitting on the AFL board of directors for Ontario. How did that all sort of come together, going from never played the sport before to you're now one of the leaders in the sport?
Yeah, so I think firstly, I didn't join sooner because if I can't be all in, I don't do something at all. So I was all in right away. I was at every training session. I was at as much as I possibly could be. And so that kind of just led to the opportunity of just people asking, hey, do you want to be, let's say, the women's rep for this year? Do you want to volunteer? And I mean, we're so volunteer based, like that's how we kind of run the league. Everyone is volunteering their time, coaches, umpires get paid a little bit, but honestly, it's not that much anyway. Like everyone's sort of volunteering their time. And so you kind of get asked that stuff. And because there aren't that many of us, it is such a niche sport in Canada. As much as Ontario is one of the bigger leagues outside of Australia, it's still not a huge sport. So there's not that many of us that are like, yeah, let's go all in. Let's do this thing. I want to volunteer this many hours because it can be a lot of hours. And so I kind of started doing sort of smaller roles in Toronto. And actually, when I moved here, my cousin was the Swans president. So that probably helped me get a little bit into things a little bit more, because he was asking, he's like, okay, I think you'd be good at this. So I kind of started as women's rep here and then kind of moved up. So now I'm the women's coach as well as our club's VP as well. And then I was also asked to be on this board of directors. So I end up being the league registrar, which is how all the players sort of get registered and transferred around from league to league. So
lots of
I got suckered into it. Let's be real. I got kind of suckered into it.
Amazing. So, I mean, outside of COVID, obviously being the obvious sort of challenge here, if we're just sort of looking at the sport as a whole and some of the things that still need to be done for it to grow, what would you say are some of the challenges for AFL? Is it recruitment and getting more people out there? Is it visibility, just sort of, making people more aware of the sport? What would you say are some of the steps that AFL still needs to take?
I would say all of the above. One thing that I think it's Calgary that actually does quite well, and we need to be doing it, I think, more here. And I think it's been done in the past, but right now it just hasn't been, is more like junior and youth programs. Because I'm sure you can understand with a full contact sport, when you're recruiting someone that is in their late 20s and early 30s, you only have so many years before your body's just like, no, thank you. Like, we're done here. I don't want to keep going. So, it would be awesome to be able to sort of get kids that are in high school interested in this, who are kind of coming up and then are able to play for like 10 or 15 years if they wanted to. Not that you would necessarily play that long, but they would have more opportunity to play for longer. So I think to me, like that seems to be something that could probably be pushed a little bit more. Obviously, I don't know what's going to happen at this point with COVID and at what point you can start doing that. But again, I know, like, I'm pretty sure it's Calgary has done a really good job of that. And that's how they sort of are growing the sport out there, which is really smart. Because I mean, anything that you can kind of put your kids into, how fun is that? So
yeah. Oh yeah.
I would say that's probably one of the bigger things.
Yeah, there's only so many miles you can get out of your knees before they give up on you.
Knees particularly. Yeah, exactly.
So so with COVID, were you guys able to get any kind of a season in, or even just a modified sort of training season, or has this year just sort of been a complete wash for you guys?
So it was obviously talked about the whole time, like, what are we going to do for games? But here in Ottawa, at least as of the beginning of July, we were able to actually start training in groups of 10 or less. Mm-hmm. So because it's kicking and hand passing, you can do that at sort of that safe distance. Make sure you're not touching your face and kind of making sure that you're sanitizing and wiping down the balls and stuff like that once you're done. But we started training in groups of 10 or less. So the women would sort of train separately. And then the men were actually having to split into two groups because I think they were so keen at that point to come out. So they were getting a lot of guys coming out to training. And then when the numbers got even larger for us to be able to train, we've started training together. So a few people have sort of dropped off, but throughout the summer we've had enough people to run training sessions, and men and women have sort of combined more often than we typically would. Which I'll argue it's been really good for the club as a whole, though. It's really cool to sort of get to know, because obviously, like, we play separately. There's a women's team and a men's team, and typically we wouldn't train together. And so often enough, you have men that don't know any of the women and vice versa, not because they don't want to, just you're not interacting with them as much. So this has been kind of cool to sort of join forces. That's been, I don't know, some of the silver lining to it, I guess. Yeah. But game-wise, like, we haven't really done anything. I think, maybe we could have done some like flag style, but it's really hard to ask a bunch of people who play a full contact sport to play it at half capacity. Yeah. So it just seemed wiser to just sort of stay away from it and just work the skills and just get better at your skills and use it for fitness. So honestly, we've had a great time. We wish we could have played, but it has been a really fun summer of footy regardless.
Yeah. Yeah. So with this sort of downtime that you've had, do you guys have any sort of big projects on the horizon, knock on wood here, that if, there's a return to play in 2021, that, stuff that you just haven't had time to do in the past because you've got 10 million other things going on? Do you have any sort of big plans for the next year at all?
Not really, not outside of what we would typically be doing. One cool thing about this year for the women, not as much for the men, but we seem to have recruited a lot of new players, which is something that we've needed to do. So that's just an ongoing project, obviously, for us. But that's been pretty cool because not everything was open and gyms weren't open and there was nothing for people to be doing. And so we've picked up more rookies than I think we picked up last year, which is very strange for a season where you're not even playing. Mm-hmm. So for us, like, recruitment is always the biggest thing. So if we were able to do that in a season where there was no games, then I think we've done pretty well, and we'll kind of keep aiming for that next year. I think obviously we are a very competitive club, so I think next year is going to be a real push to get back, if we can be playing next year, to get back sort of at the same level that we went out at. Our men's team has won 2 back-to-back grand finals, so they were premiers 2 years in a row. Women went to grand final 2 years ago, so like, we are quite a competitive club, and we would like to sort of get back and make sure that we're doing as well as we were doing when we left.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
You know, what are some of the recruitment strategies that you guys are using? Because obviously, unless you've got, you know, maybe a specialized TV package or something like that, it's not like you turn on the TV and TSN, Sportsnet, and everything else is playing, you know, Aussie rules football all the time. So how do you sort of market it to people who have maybe never heard of the sport before? Is it all just word of mouth and I've got a friend who knows this person, or do you guys have sort of an overarching package that you sort of put out there?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is word of mouth. We have like promo material as well. We get on social media as much as we can. So Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, that's helpful. A lot of the rookies actually that came out this year said that they just ended up Googling us and they found us through social media. So that's awesome, that seems to be a thing that's working. We have definitely done bar nights before where we have cards and we hand them out and wear our Swans gear, and we've done pub crawls and stuff like that. So that's definitely been done before. We haven't really figured out the best way, I would say, to recruit, but I think it's not just the Swans that struggle with this. It is like all of Ontario sort of struggles with that. And Toronto particularly has a hard time because they have a few teams that are all within the same city. So that can be a little bit of a struggle as well. It does help though that Aussies always find us. So Australians, when they come here and they're living in your city, they find the club because it's something that they want to play, or it's something that they sort of a community they want to be a part of because it's a little bit of home. So that's not a huge way of recruitment, but there seems to always be some Australians that come through the door for at least 2 years. So.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, you briefly touched on it before. Are you seeing any sort of trends in terms of the people that are sort of signing up there, whether it's, you know, more women are playing or, you know, maybe more new Canadians or just even younger players in general are signing up? Or is it just sort of a grab bag every year?
It's a grab bag every year. Yeah, the women's team sort of wasn't as huge a couple years ago, and it is a little bit cyclical, and I think our men's team will fall into this next year a bit. You get a lot of rookies all at the same time, but they all tend to leave at the same time. So that sort of happened with the women's team a couple of years ago, and now we've kind of built those numbers back up. But I don't really know how to explain why there's an ebb and flow to it, and I don't know why or what the reason is, but yeah, you never know what you're going to get in a season, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. And, you know, when you think about maybe some of the big four sports, you know, hockey, baseball, basketball, all that stuff there, you know, when you look at the youth system, there's always sort of that carrot that's dangled in front of them as far as, you know, if you are good enough at this, you can get your scholarship, you can go pro, you can do this,
Yeah.
that, and the other there, right? What sort of options are there, not necessarily just in Ontario, but maybe even in Canada for, you know, post-secondary or scholarships or professional level? Is there much of that, or?
Yeah, so that's actually that actually does keep some people involved. So there's a few different levels that you can sort of get to, and this is the funny thing with footy in Ontario or within Canada is some people almost see it as like beer league, and there are those of us that take it very seriously, and it's very competitive for us. So we typically in Ontario will do, or within Canada, but there is a Team Ontario, so we do a provincials tournament, so you can play sort of at that provincial level, and then from there you can actually play for the national team as well. So I've played for the provincial team. I played over in the UK for the national team, the development team. So there are opportunities to sort of play at that higher level. We have had some Canadian players. It's only been a couple, but it's still pretty amazing, that are women that have actually been drafted to the AFL Women's League in Australia. So that was professional. Again, it's not many, but it is something that you can get to. And I think even just like representing your country is a pretty cool thing to do, even in a very niche sport like that. It's a very cool thing to do. And unfortunately, this past summer, that got canceled. So every 3 years, there's something called the International Cup. So we had Swans that were ready to go play for Canada in that every 3-year tournament, and that got canceled. So hopefully that happens next summer. But I think that does help recruit and retain people, that you're like, okay, maybe being on Team Canada at some other sport was a huge dream of yours. And that didn't happen in whatever other sport, but like, this is still a possibility for you. Especially like even into your early and late 30s and stuff like that, which is not always the case for a lot of sports. So I do think that that retains some players and gets them kind of working hard and sticking around.
Yeah, yeah, and maybe putting your Swans hat aside here and putting on sort of your AFL Ontario hat there. Has there been any discussion at sort of the provincial level about trying to get, whether it's colleges or universities or anything like that, to start offering it as a varsity sport, or is that something that's not really been on the radar, or has maybe been stuck in the mud for a little bit?
Yeah, so one thing Ontario was supposed to do, and it was literally the same weekend that COVID just blew everything up. We were supposed to be participating in the kin games. So universities, the kinesiology games, universities were going to be participating with a bunch of different sports. And we had a bunch of footy coaches and players that were going to go coach. I don't know if it was going to be, I think it was going to be touch. I don't know that it was going to be full contact, but it was going to be intro to AFL into universities. So that unfortunately just never happened. And it was literally that weekend that it all went down. That I would say though, like we were going to participate, but that's more a conversation that AFL Canada has, that board. They do a lot more in regards to that. So I don't know all the details of that, but that was at least something that we were going to try to do. So maybe in the future that'll happen again, but like that kind of stuff is good for awareness of the sport, obviously.
Yeah. Go figure, right? COVID just throwing wrenches into absolutely every plan known to mankind this year, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if there was someone who was listening to this and thought, you know what, I've heard of it, I've always kind of wanted to try it, but I just never knew where to start. Like, what would be a good sort of intro to the sport for them? Is there like a try it night that they can go to for the Swans, or do they pretty much have to sign up for a league and in for a penny, in for a pound type thing?
Yeah, so I think any training session that we do is a try it out night. We always want more people around the club. And even if that means that you're like, you know what, I just want to train a few times and I don't want to play any games, by all means, come out and train with us. It's fun to have more people around. More numbers at training is awesome. So we try to kind of keep everyone together for stuff like that. And in the winter sessions, what we've been doing the last couple of years is we actually said rookies can come train for free. Obviously, we have to cover the dome session. So for players, we typically would pay like 10, 15 bucks a session. But for rookies, we're like, just come try it. No skin in the game. Just see what you think of it. A lot of people are hooked right away. And again, a lot of people just like the people that they're around, so they'll stick it out. But honestly, like it's your commitment. It's totally up to you. So if you want to show up to a training session and maybe half the games for the season, that's fine. And that's what you're going to do. A lot of people end up, when they come out though, they're all in, they're all for it. But honestly, like people have different commitment levels and that's totally okay.
Yeah. What would you say has been your most memorable experience with the sport so far? If you need to pick two, you can pick two.
Yeah, I think I have a top, I guess I have two. And they both were sort of getting into that grand final. So the first club that I played for, they, I think, started they started the women's team back in like 2010 or 2011, and they had never made it to the grand final. So they never made it all the way through finals to play in that sort of final championship game. So we made it through that year, my third year playing, I think, right before I moved to Ottawa. And that was a pretty big deal just because it was the first time it had happened in however many years. So that was pretty cool. And then I would say tops, like my favorite footy moment was getting into the grand final back in 2018 with the Swans. It was the weekend of the tornado actually here in Ottawa. So no one had power. It was awful. We all had to get up at like 5:30 in the morning and drive to Toronto to play a game that I was like, nah, you know what? I don't think we're going to win this, but like, let's go give it everything we have. It's fine. We're going to be fine. Let's just go have fun and play. And we ended up playing, I would say, our best game of the season. And then we ended up beating a team that I don't know that we should have beaten. And so that kind of sent us to grand final, which we lost, and that's fine. But just getting into that grand final was such a big deal. And our men were going to grand final that year as well, which they ended up winning. So we all sort of got to go to that grand final together. And that was a pretty cool experience. That was something to definitely be proud of. As much as we didn't walk away with a flag that year, just making it there was a pretty big deal for the team. So
Yeah, amazing.
Cool.
So if people wanted to learn more about, either your story or the Swans or anything like that, where can people get more information? Where can people find you guys?
Literally just Google us and we'll show up. Like that's Ottawa Swans, AFC. And that'll be the website. You can find us on Facebook. Again, that's under Ottawa Swans. And we're also on Instagram and Twitter. So we're pretty easy to find if you literally just Google us. All of those places, you can actually just shoot us a message, whether that's like DM the Instagram account, Facebook account, whatever. There's always someone there to answer within a few hours. So that's an easy way to sort of look us up and see what we're all about. And if you want to chat with anyone there, just send a message through.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. And I would say good luck with your upcoming matches, but who knows when that'll be. But hopefully, fingers crossed, sooner rather than later there. And that's a wrap for another episode of the Dine Sports YouTube page and podcast network. A huge thank you goes out to our guest today, Michelle Huard, for sitting down and talking all things Aussie rules football and sort of what the future holds for them and how they've been coping during the pandemic there. So best of luck to them in the future. As always, if you like what you saw, make sure you like, comment, share, subscribe. We've also got various social media channels. We'd love to connect with you guys on there as well too. We've got some contests, giveaways, good stuff like that. So make sure you head on over to whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of them are at Dine Sports. So make sure you give us a like or follow on there as well too. Got some great guests coming up next week there, some phenomenal interviews. So stay tuned for that. Until then, have a great day.